of yesterday and today. So I just wanted to kick off with that. So welcome everyone to this really important conversation about Black AAPI solidarity in the labor movement. We want this to be a casual space and everyone will have a chance to ask questions and join the conversation, but we ask folks to mute themselves until it's time for Q&A. And if you can't hold it in, you can put it in the chat. So please, we have multiple ways to connect. So before we get started too, I wanted to bring up the APALA Code of Conduct. So APALA is committed to providing an environment free from discrimination and harassment regardless of an individual's race, ethnicity, religion, color, sex, age, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, gender identity or expression, ancestry, pregnancy, or any other characteristic prohibited by law. As such, APALA will not tolerate discriminatory, harassing, or otherwise unacceptable behavior at any of our activities, events, or meetings. APALA expects everyone who participates in our activities, events, or meetings to abide by this standard of conduct. So thank you for joining us at APALA. We want to make sure that this is a safe space for us to all learn and grow together. So in terms of, so as many of you know, I see a lot of board members as well as former board members. We usually have a community labor reception the day before our board meeting in whatever city that we usually are in. And you know, while we're having our board meeting virtually tomorrow, we wanted to still have a space for folks to come together and you know, hear from folks and engage with us. And you know, we wanted to hold this space and you know, with everything that is going on, we wanted to make sure that we had some time to talk about what is going on. So we're really heartbroken and angry and frustrated and ready and feeling all the feelings about what's going on and the systematic violence or state-sanctioned murder of Black bodies in this country and beyond. It's especially heartbreaking during COVID-19, where Black folks are a disproportionate number of people who are frontline workers and cannot safely go for a run or sleep in their home. We know that the Asian American identity emerged from the Black liberation movement. We've said this before and we'll say it again because the work continues. We all have a role in responding and leading in this movement. We wanted to host this conversation to provide a space for our members and our leaders and our partners in the struggle to talk about what Black and AAPI solidarity in the labor movement should look like. So for those who joined us today, please continue to type your name and pronouns in the chat box and maybe even what brought you here today. What are you looking forward to hearing about? Type your answers in the chat box and we'll read some of them out. Great, so I'm seeing folks from all over the country, folks from Seattle, LA, Minnesota. Folks are asking if there's people from New York. I know there's folks from New York here. Louisa from Hayward, our staff, Christina, Anna, Eunice, our local president in Seattle is here. Arlene from LA, UTLA. Again, Freddie, who's our Dream Summer Fellow this summer, is with us. We have some of my union folks, Lindsay, Kimberly, Telly, educators are in the house. Carmelita from APALA South Bay is with us. Gillian, DC chapter and national treasurer is with us. Maitan is with us from Houston. Johanna from APALA San Diego UDW is with us. Oh, Brian, brand new board member from Hawaii is with us. Aloha. Tamisha is with us from CT as well. Russell, Jigme from Minnesota, Dennis from the board. Thank you all for joining. Please continue to type in what you're looking forward to in this conversation. So we have this really great crew of folks to talk with us today about this topic. We thought it was really important to invite our brother Tefere, who is with the AFL-CIO, as well as some of our chapter leaders from Minnesota, since you know, there's been a lot going on in Minnesota, to join us. So thank you for joining us, Tefere, Kimberly, and Zarlasht. I wanted to just kick it off and have you all introduce yourselves for a few minutes, your background, your history, and also talk about what you think solidarity means at this moment and how you've been involved.
So do you want me to start?
Yeah, please.
Hi, everybody, and Monica and Joanna and Alvina, and for inviting me and for thinking of me actually to join your fireside chat, as you call it. So I'm really, really excited to be here. Again, my name is Tefere Gebre. I'm one of the 3 elected leaders of the National AFL-CIO. I serve as an executive vice president. Before that, I come out of the California labor movement, and my last stop being Orange County, California. I identify myself with so many categories. As a Black man, and also as an immigrant who speaks with a very thick accent. So I find myself a lot of times in rooms with people who don't talk like me, who don't look like me, and that's the constant struggle. But I try to take advantage of whatever is offered on those tables to advance the causes that we all care about. I was born in Ethiopia and migrated to the United States in 1984. I have lived most of my life in the United States, and sometimes I will be honest with you, I don't know when the time would that would be that I would become real American. It's not because I don't want it to, but from airports to everywhere else, I still might find myself being suspect about being here in our country. So that's who I am. I'm a Californian through and through, living in Maryland and Washington, D.C. right now, but I'm looking forward for this conversation.
Thank you, Tefere. Kimberly or Zarlasht?
I can go next. I don't mind. I can't see Kimberly's screen, but thank you so much, Monica, Alvina, Vivian, everybody for having us here. It's so wonderful to be in conversation with everybody. I'm Zarlasht. I am a first-generation American. I'm a descendant of refugees from Kabul, Afghanistan, or Afghanistan. I am a student right now in a master's program studying human rights. Along with my organizing work with APALA, Minnesota, I also work with MIRAC, the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee. I'm also a member of the Afghan Cultural Society of Minnesota and a part of the union AFSCME 3800. And I know that you had other parts in the question. Just to repeat, it was what has solidarity looked like and what has been our involvement in the organizing in Minnesota right now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. It's going to be a bit long, a bit longer than.
All good. Take your time.
Okay, wonderful. So Solidarity has really been just focusing on what Black organizers need in this moment, listening, being really just paying a lot of attention and responding as well as we can. So for me, Solidarity has meant attending protests day and night, despite the curfew and despite the intimidation from the National Guard and the police. So there have been a lot of instances of people being maimed and even killed by the rubber bullets and all the other weapons that have been used against protesters. So despite all of this, Solidarity has looked like showing up. It has also looked like hosting community breakfast at, so through my work with MIRAC, we co-hosted a community breakfast at the George Floyd Memorial Site with Native Lives Matter and Asamblea de Derechos Civiles. So this was a free community breakfast, and I personally made 30 or 40 Afghan breakfast sandwiches. We fed a lot of people. We talked about labor, Black liberation. We talked about Native lives. We talked about Latinx lives. And we had a performance by Maria Isa, an original song dedicated to George Floyd called Como Duele. So that was really exciting. Solidarity has also meant kind of finding alternative ways to support. So trying something, seeing that it's not working, and finding a new way to be present in that moment. So that happened when we showed up to do cleanup efforts, because as a lot of people know, there has been a lot of destruction during the nights. And so we've had cleanup efforts during the day. And as a part of APALA, Minnesota, we all gathered together and went to the cleanup sites to help. And it was actually a really good problem in that there were a lot of people. So we helped where we could, and then we had to find alternative ways of supporting. So what that looked like was having signs representing Asians for Black lives, starting those conversations with people, marching. So that was a way that we kind of altered our idea of solidarity in the moment. Another way was by participating in protests and not participating in protests when it wasn't appropriate. So there was a day of no protesting requested on behalf of George Floyd's family on the day of his funeral. And I had planned to attend a march on that day for Iana Dior, who is a Black trans woman in our community who had been physically assaulted. And so that was kind of a difficulty in solidarity here in Minneapolis, in which showing up in solidarity with Iana Dior on that day was in conflict with the family's request. So that was kind of complexify a word, to complicate, there we go, complicate solidarity. It's also meant speaking to our family members, head on talking about anti-Blackness within our communities. And it has, of course, been discussing Asian complacency, calling out Officer Tutao's role in the situation. So there's been a lot of different ways that solidarity has played out.
Great, thank you. Kimberly, do you want to jump on in and introduce yourself and talk about solidarity?
So hi everybody, my name is Kimberly Kolbert, and I am an English teacher on leave working as the racial equity organizer for Education Minnesota. My job is to organize and to provide support for our members of color. I'm really happy to be here tonight. Thank you so much, everyone. APALA board and officers for asking us to do this. I feel as though I am the embodiment of the topic. My mother is Japanese American. My father was African American, and I am old. So when I was born during a time when interracial relationships were not really popular and not very common. And my mother, in fact, has been just as influential as my father. She, in the 1960s, wrote in Eldridge Cleaver for president, who was a Black Panther leader. So I feel as though my background has really been something that has brought me to this point right now. When I think about solidarity, Zarlasht mentioned a lot of what APALA Minnesota has been doing. My solidarity actions have really been within the union itself. I am part of a small private union that is a member of the AFL-CIO, and then I work for Education Minnesota. And we have some very serious institutional racism that happens. And so when George Floyd was murdered, there was a lot of internal work that had to be done, trying to take care of employees of, colleagues of color, but also members of color who are in the midst of COVID. They're in the midst of distance learning. They're experiencing either directly or indirectly a lot of the disparities that we see that are happening, in particular in Black communities. They're worrying about children. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing has been within my organization to try to move them toward a much more clear anti-racist agenda that they can set an example for other union organizations. I was in solidarity with my APALA, Minnesota folks on one day when they were protesting downtown. I went to the home of the Hennepin County attorney to protest Mike Freeman. As you all probably know, they have given the case to, thank goodness, to our attorney general. But at that time, at first, it was, I think, 5 days, was it? I know it was about 4 or 5 days before they arrested anybody, and then probably 6 or 7 days before they decided that they were just going to turn it over to the attorney general. And so there were a number of protests going on, and I went to Mike Freeman's house, where several of the families of people who have been killed by police were speaking. And it was really, really a moving thing. And I just hope that as we all move forward, that there will be some very, very intentional and impactful reforms and things that happen.
Thank you. I have this special place in my heart for APALA, Minnesota, because my parents were refugees too, and were resettled in Minnesota when they first came to the US. And so I always joke that I want to be their honorary member. And thank you so much for really leading and holding it down, and letting folks lead, and taking what folks are saying they need in this moment for APIs in Minnesota and across the country. I think you all are really showing us the way, especially in other cities, how APALA Minnesota, or how APALA chapters can really stand in solidarity with Black lives in this moment. So thank you. So, in the past few weeks, we've seen this massive change in opinion regarding Black Lives Matter, even from a year ago, to the point where corporations, celebrities, and institutions are now saying Black Lives Matter on social media. But a lot of it has been hollow, and without a real examination on how anti-Blackness pervades our institutions, and it also doesn't have a real commitment in terms of policy changes or funding. How do we exert our role as labor leaders in how we show up, not just as allies, but instead as co-conspirators in the fight for Black liberation? How can we follow and center Black leaders further than what we've been able to do?
So I'll start again, and my apologies. I missed what solidarity means to you part of the question in the introduction. I think solidarity to me means this: opening up and doing what you can to actually support. And but the key part of it is, Monica, what you just mentioned. Solidarity is really practiced and tested not when it is sunny outside. Our solidarity is measured when it is raining outside. And we should demand for people to stand in solidarity with us, not when things are good, but when things are bad. So, to your question, a lot of progress have happened just in a span of a few weeks to a struggle that has been happening literally for centuries. We're seeing from California to New York, no less than 30 jurisdictions which has banned chokeholds. We're seeing police officers getting fired on the spot for violating someone's civil rights. And all of this is the result of not any political movement, but the streets. The streets, as labor leaders, that we should realize that our movement was born on the streets and the shop floors, not the executive board meetings and fancy board rooms. So we're seeing the result of actually what the streets produce. But I want us to be mindful of another movement which sprung up like this not too long ago. That is the Occupy Wall Street movement. That movement forever coined the 99% and the 1%, the 1% that everyone uses in their political slogans to this day. But tragically, what happened to that movement was there was no institutions ready to institutionalize the gains that that movement was bringing up. So I see a lot of energy on the streets that I have never seen before. It has been a month and people are still out on the streets protesting and demanding justice and demanding lasting change. So what is the role of the labor movement at this conjuncture? Hanging banners saying we support Black Lives Matter is not enough. We have to become Black Lives Matter ourselves. The young people of rainbow color that are on the streets are the make it or break it of the labor movement. Either we go join them or they will march just by us. So I find myself in a crossroads of fear, excitement, and confusion. The fear part of it is, I just want everybody to understand, for Black people today, as exciting as it is to see what happens on the streets, it also has been so traumatic to a lot of us because it has recalled what has happened in our lives. For me, it's hard sometimes to go to bed and close my eyes and fall asleep because I lived through the Rodney King situation in Los Angeles, where really APALA was born out of. I have gone through on my own life and practiced police brutality. Things that I had forgotten, that a cop pulling me over on the 5 freeway in Los Angeles by Elysian Park and grabbing me by my shirt and putting a gun in my mouth. And if you guys remember the early 90s, there were these freeway shootings that used to happen and telling me some of the shootings happened this way. I thought I had forgotten about that. That just keeps on coming back. So why I'm saying this is that I just think that part of the solidarity is that if you have Black friends, lend them a shoulder to lean on. try to be as the best listeners as you could be. Because as original people as Black people are to this country, 400 years of virtual slavery happening to this day. That's traumatic. So I was talking with Alvina the other day, and I just Googled something that happened in 2011. And I want to warn people, this could be graphic for some of you, but I asked Alvina if she could put it on the screen. When I heard about Baba, the NASCAR driver, and the news that was found in his garage, and people talking about it, immediately the trauma of thinking about how I felt on a Monday morning after Labor Day, after we had just negotiated one of the best things that in my life I have done. That was fighting for immigrant and undocumented sanitation workers and getting them their first union contract the night before. In the morning, my staff at the Orange County Labor Federation found the noose hanging right by the door. It is a rope. And we can't see it and we can't dismiss it at that. But to me, that was frightening. That was a warning sign of actually what people could say could do to you. This country have had a mean streak. And why I'm talking about this is that it cannot just be about the police. We cannot just leave it at reforming police departments. We need to reform the hearts and minds of our neighbors, our families, our colleagues at the workplace. That the scourge of racism dehumanizes people. And in a sense, our call is to rehumanize Black people, as harsh as that sounds. And there is no one who has the reach that the labor movement has to actually start these conversations. I could go on and on and on by giving you an example after example. I'm married to a white woman. My wife and I left San Diego and moved just a little bit north to North San Diego. And we're looking at places to buy or rent. And this white woman saw me driving a car with my wife and called the police because she thought I was kidnapping my wife. And we got pulled over. And the cop didn't even talk to me. He went straight to my wife and said, "Are you okay?" I let it go. But for her, it was so traumatic of thinking like she never thought that happens to people. And there are a lot of good white people who don't think these things happen. It is about goddamn time we have that conversation with them. If you love me, you need to help me change the system. Help me root out racism from its roots. Police reform, we need it. Police behavior change, we need it. But America itself needs to change its behavior, the way it views its own people. And this is a massive time that we are in. If we let it go, just like we did with Occupy Wall Street, we'll just be talking about what opportunities there were. So talk to your labor leaders that the rhetoric is good. But if we don't have the budgeting and the staffing and the commitment and the lasting commitment to having this conversation, It's not only dangerous for Black people and people of color, it's dangerous for the labor movement itself for its own survival. I think that's where the movement we are in right now is. You know, our office is right now on Black Lives Matter Plaza, what used to be 16th Street. That's nice. You know, we used to be called Negroes. Then we started to be called colored people, colored. We thought those were victories. Those were cosmetic changes. Brothers and sisters, this is the time we demand concrete change. We demand that our lives actually matter, not only to the police, but to our neighbors and to America in general. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Tefere. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your call to action for all of us as folks in the labor movement, and what we can do to stand with and be co-conspirators with Black leaders and Black community members for Black liberation. I wanted to also see if Zarlasht and Kimberly wanted to add what we can do as folks in the labor movement too.
Yeah.
Oh.
You can go ahead, it's okay.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Tefere. I hope I spelled your name correctly in the chat. I think that he hit on so many important points. You know, first of all, I just want to say that, you know, the union structure, I feel very strongly that the union structure is so important for marginalized folks to be able to have the opportunity to get ahead in ways that we have not been able to, you know, start building generational wealth and things like that. But it's flawed. And you know, I think that it's important for us to know our history. And I think that it's important, if we're talking about APIs for Black Lives Matter, to really share the history of you know, the civil rights movement and what Black people and Indigenous people have gone through, because we have been enslaved and we have been othered, and the same thing happens to other folks of color as well. And so drawing those connections are really important. I think that as we move forward to act in solidarity, the things that Zarlasht was saying about listening and joining are really important. But I do think that one of the most important things that can happen is and I'll just talk about personal, local, and immediate for my own organization, is that some union organizations need to apologize. They need to apologize for being complicit in racism, institutional racism. They need to talk about how they're going to do better and have concrete steps for moving forward. In Minnesota, we as Education Minnesota and the AFL-CIO and a number of other unions have been calling for the resignation of Bob Kroll, who is the president of the police union, who is a known racist. However, we're also seeing an uptick in students of color calling out teachers and talking about how they have been victims of racist behavior. And so the word on the street is that the educator union could be next. And I just firmly believe, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I just know that if we are not strong in understanding and communicating our complicity, we are going to have parents and communities that are not going to be able to trust us, right? Because we have said, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and nothing has really changed in the minds of you know, many of our public school students and their parents. And so I think the strongest thing that we can do is just to take a page out of, right, being anti-racist and saying what we've been part of, apologizing and moving forward. And I think that as a labor movement will speak volumes and will allow us to say, when we are when people are coming after us, right? Not because they're anti-racist, but because they're anti-union, right? When they come after us, we can say, hey, you know, we've talked about this and we have given our agenda and we are moving forward in this way.
Thank you, Kimberly. I think that was really powerful. I remember I was at a conference one time, an Indigenous education conference, and someone started their talk with education as a tool of the colonizer, right? So I think what you talked about in terms of, you know, we're flawed and we need to apologize. I think that really resonated with me, because how can we be a tool for liberation if we don't recognize our flawed histories? So thank you. Zarlasht, did you want to jump in too?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Those were great responses. Especially, I really liked the accountability piece of what you said, Kimberly. And I just wanted to say, so just to bring it back to the question, it was how to exert our role as labor leaders in how we are not just allies, but co-conspirators in the Black liberation movement, in the fight for Black liberation. So I think that the first really easy automatic answer is listen to what our Black leaders have to say. But then when you think about it, you're like, oh wait, I'm just creating more work for our Black leaders to be doing. What am I, because that's more of an ally role, right? And that's what we're trying to step away from. We don't want to be allies. We want to be co-conspirators. We don't want to be passive. We want to take an active role as people in solidarity with this movement, right? So I think I'm trying to imagine what this looks like, and what it already looks like for a lot of us is to, in terms of labor, to look at our workplaces, look at who's getting hired, who's taking up which positions, who got opportunities for professional advancement and development, making sure that Black people have space in these, in every step of these processes. We need to refuse that color blindness in the workplace. We need to be very aware of microaggressions as they're happening. And we need to cultivate relationships with our Black peers so that they feel comfortable looking around and thinking, oh, I know this person is in solidarity with me. I can tell them about this, and hopefully they will support me when I bring up a complaint. Or maybe just be an ear to listen. Whatever our coworkers, our peers, whatever they need. So I think that's really important, that we take that really active role of always looking for opportunities to kind of dismantle the anti-Blackness and be anti-racist in our workplaces, and to hold our leaders accountable. Yeah.
Thank you, Zarlasht. So I feel like there are these other questions that are here, but I'm gonna, and Alvina is asking for questions in the chat in case folks want to ask questions. And this is like a question pending time because it's a big question. And I wanted to go ahead and just ask it, right? So we know that institutional change is really difficult, especially in our unions and in the labor movement, for some of the structures and infrastructure that we have in place. But what are the leverage points for change to happen? How do we use this moment to grow our labor movement? I think one thing that I've really repeated a lot is in my own union, folks are worried about talking about race because it may scare people off or may make people drop their memberships. But what I'm also seeing is that there's this whole body of members who've never engaged in the labor movement and are now engaging because the labor movement and the union is finally talking about race and Black liberation. So what are other places that you've seen in our huge institution that are leverage points? Go ahead, Tefere.
Well, you know, I think the labor movement is not lacking in rhetoric from and in resolutions that gets passed, and how we mechanize that is a big question. But the heart of it is what he just said. That is, we don't want to risk anything, and we don't want to offend anybody. We are always calculating of actually how our rural white voters or members would react if we do this. I just think we're at a point right now, you can't avoid that. You can't avoid that conversation. This is not only about race and Black people only. It also includes immigration and the conversations that has to be to come from us about migrant workers. Every time pollsters come and consultants come in, they tell us that there isn't a good way to talk to our members in the Midwest about immigration because they are already made up their mind that's a problem. Well, if we don't talk about it, the other side is going to talk about it. And we're just leaving the field for the other side. I think the conversation about race is also the same thing. Either we talk about it or other people will shape our conversations for us. And that will put us all the time in that square box of not being hot, not being cold. And like the Bible says, if you're warm, I'll spit you out. And we don't want to be spit out. We have to choose a lane and travel in that lane. And that is the challenge. But as everything else, nothing worthwhile is ever achieved without risking something. If this is going to cause us a membership loss, is liberation of not only Black people, but people of color, worth it for the labor movement to lose membership? That is the question that leaders have to answer for themselves. Is it worth the fight? Other than that, I think we're going to find ourselves in the same square that we have been before.
I agree. And in 1956, the American Federation of Teachers put forward a resolution at their convention that said that if you are a local organization affiliated with the AFT and you don't desegregate, you will lose your affiliation. They had, I think it was like decades that 20 years they were talking about it, and they finally put it forward. And that resolution passed and they lost a ton of members, but they were better for it. And it's really difficult. And I think that what we have to be most afraid of is not losing membership, but letting the conversation to go into another camp, and then we lose labor altogether. And I think that sometimes our white leaders don't understand that. And I think that there has to be a way that we can help them to understand. But I fully agree, Tefere, with what you're saying. We have to take control of that narrative, or somebody else will.
Look, also, sorry for talking too much, but I also see opportunities. As you know, at the opening, Monica talked about from NASCAR to Coca-Cola to everybody else is now saying Black Lives Matter. And I wonder, why wouldn't we say, if Black Lives Matter, you should allow your Black workers actually to have a freedom at the workplace? Wouldn't that be the role we should be playing? Wouldn't that be the role we should be playing, to hold corporations accountable to the slogans they are putting up there? Corporate America created the massive inequality in our neighborhoods. Corporate America controls the redlining of people of color from even actually getting a mortgage, or the value of their homes not even actually rising as everybody else. Talk is cheap. From union halls to corporate boardrooms, we need to hold people who talk accountable to their talk.
Thank you, Tefere. Zarlasht, did you want to comment about how to make institutional change?
I'm pretty young and I don't have as much experience as Tefere and Kimberly, and I really do love what they've said. I guess the only thing I would really add is the importance of youth in this movement and in general. I know that labor is knowing about, just being involved in unions. I'm quite new to this, and seeing the unions involved in this movement has been really important for me in kind of feeling secure in my position as a union member. So yeah, I completely agree with what Tefere and Kimberly were saying. If unions decided not to support these movements, I would definitely not be comfortable continuing. So yeah, I think it's really important that we continue using this moment where so many youth are out in the streets to be present, to introduce ourselves as union members, as laborers, and get that connection kind of sealed into people's heads, like labor, unions, Black Lives Matter, people of color matter, humanity, that kind of idea. I love it. But yeah, that's all I have to add.
I love how you qualified your age as not having experience or expertise, and then you drop tons of golden nuggets and knowledge on us. And watch out, I used to say that I'm new to labor and I got caught out for that. And then all of a sudden I've spent a third of my life in labor, and I'm pretty young too. So, I think I appreciate you bringing up the importance of youth though, right? I think that so much of the fight on the streets right now is being led by our youth, and it's being led by folks who can actually dream of a world without some of this blockage. And so I think we need everyone in the movement and in the struggle to come up with what we envision the world to be together. So yeah, I liked how you did that. So I know I know that you also brought up this thing earlier about, what we can do as co-conspirators, which includes speaking up and speaking out, and taking some of the work and the labor, not to lead, but to support and lift up, right? And I see Dr. Tamisha Bram Carter's on here, and we were on an event a couple of nights ago, and she said this thing about how silence is not golden here. And that just reminded me of that. And sometimes some of these conversations to call in and educate and call out are really, really hard when they are with our own family members and community members. And, anti-Blackness runs deep in Asian American communities through experiences, real or perceived, as someone who grew up in with like refugee family members that were resettled in places that were for generations divested and almost set up to like perpetuate anti-Blackness, right? I just wanted to lift that up, and also the question that Gebre put in the chat, which was, how do we break away from the internalized racism and oppression so many folks in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community live with, right? And if you all can provide some concrete examples, that would be really helpful. Internalized racism. Okay. Go ahead, Kimberly.
Well, I was just gonna say, when my mother told my grandmother that she was gonna marry my father, and she was also having a baby, which was me. The story is told that my grandmother went to bed for 2 weeks and didn't get up, and it was a real struggle, right, to figure out how to bring the family together. And this is in Minnesota, where when my parents went to get an apartment, they didn't say that they didn't want to rent to my father, who was Black. They said that they didn't want to rent to my mother, who was Asian, because Asian people cook smelly food, right? And so I think that you know, what it took for my grandparents to kind of come around was the birth of this child and, you know, the creation of family. And I think that relationships and history and understanding play such a big part, you know, when we can talk about being all folks who are othered in some way and talk about what that really means with each other, you know. I think that that helps to kind of crack open those that real deep hurt and understanding that I think that we all have about not being, well, about the effect that white supremacy has on us as folks of color. And that's difficult. I think that that's really difficult. When George Floyd was killed, my family, my Japanese side of the family, who I have not known as political at all, were posting like crazy. I think that they were busier than I was, you know, just sharing and calling and trying to make sure that my brother and I were okay, but also really trying to be part of a conversation. And I don't want more lives to be lost for us to, you know, start looking at how we all internalize, right, this othering that happens with institutional and with just racism in general. But I think we have a prime opportunity now to take advantage of our relationships and really start talking to each other about what it is that we can do in solidarity, so that the next person that maybe is confronted by police is not an API person, because that has happened in Minnesota. So relationships and listening and you know, a lot of courage.
Thank you, Kimberly. Tefere or Zarlasht, did you want to jump in around combating internalized oppression and anti-Blackness in the Asian American community?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak on it for a minute. Well, more than a minute maybe, but we'll see. You know, this has been a really hard thing to talk about with my family. It always has been, because my family, so I'm Afghan, and Afghans are pretty white passing a lot of the time. I look brown, so people don't usually assume I'm white, but a lot of my family is white passing, and they've been able to assume that kind of identity of whiteness and profit from white privilege. And so when the George Floyd protests happened, a lot of my relatives, actually, they're Trump supporters, embarrassingly, and they did post some really offensive things on social media. And so that was, I think, I'm not sure if other people have this experience as much, but that's one way that they kind of started that conversation for us to have. It was they posted something, and then I direct messaged them and I talked to them about it, and I opened that space to be like, why would you say this? Let's have this conversation, because we do have that personal relationship to build off of. And so I think another thing that has helped a lot is that so many different groups are coming out of this movement that are directly related to our communities and are built by our communities. And I know APALA, Minnesota has done a good job of doing this in like the creation of Tibetans for Black Lives. And there's also been Afghans for Black Lives Matter. And they're doing a lot of really awesome work around translating information into our native languages, so that we can have these conversations in really effective ways, because that language barrier can make it so hard to talk about these things too, these issues. So that's something I wish I had when I was younger, when I was trying to have these conversations with my parents and my grandparents. But yeah, so that's something that's really helpful, is to just look online, see what organizations exist, what groups are coming into being, and seeing what your resources are for how you can engage with your family members, with your friends, the people around you who do who are expressing anti-Blackness. So yeah.
Just shortly, you know, it's not internalized racism just in the Asian community or anything. You know, the system has been set up that way. I'm not, my parents were not refugees. I myself came in as a refugee into this country. So even within my own Ethiopian community, like the way they view Black Americans is different. It's different because of the way it has been portrayed for generations and generations, from TV shows to movies to even knowing incarceration numbers and all that stuff that just preconditions people to look at Black people differently. And there is no other solution for this other than actually having a heart-to-heart conversation. The hard work of organizing and just people getting to know each other. That's why the APALA's role and the role still you play after the Rodney King thing is so crucial, and that is what we have to reinvigorate, is that for people to actually understand human beings are human beings. That's why in my opening I talked about rehumanizing Black people in this country. Because people who don't think they're racists, they have this internal feeling of that when they see Black people, they are seeing thugs. They are seeing murderers. They are seeing someone who's coming to rob them. And there is this animalistic feeling that people have to react that way. As it was manifested about what happened in Central Park. The dog walker calling a cop on the bird watching. Same thing happens in our workplaces. And the thing is, I don't know what we have to do to make especially Black men not threatening to look at. But that has to be part of the conversation. But I think that is systemically created. It's not individuals just imagining it. It's the system has created that image. Systematically that image has been created. Black people are worthless thugs whose entire purpose is to just rob you and be criminals. And we cannot be afraid to have that conversation of actually how we humanize Black people to our own neighbors and to our own families.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course, of course.
I just wanted to also add that there will be times when people's opinions are not going to be as malleable. Right now might not be the moment, or you might not be the person to deliver that message. So don't beat yourself up if your racist relative doesn't change. I think that's been really hard for me to just not feel like, you know, as a person who gets exhausted, because we're dealing with a lot of racism, we're dealing with a lot of things too, like to put that on our backs of these people who are actively choosing to be racist and to not change. You know, that's not our fault. We'll do what we can, but, you know, don't beat yourself up over it if it doesn't change. That's all.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I know that there were a lot of my friends who were avoiding adding their family members to their like Facebook and social media, and when this all happened, they were like, "Yep, gonna add that auntie, gonna add that uncle," so that they see exactly where they stand, right? And I think you know, thank you, Tefere, for bringing up this, you know, the importance of humanizing like all of our communities, right? And while I think it's important right now to not turn away from the violence and what is happening, it's also really important, and I've heard the call to also talk about Black joy and love and art and celebration and accomplishments as well. And I think as we, you know, fight and organize and try to dismantle and rebuild systems, we always need to find ways to also celebrate and build and rejuvenate. And I guess in that spirit, I wanted to introduce our national treasurer, Gillian Matenda from AFL-CIO, because if folks don't know, not only is Gillian this awesome labor political organizer and our treasurer, but she is also a musician. So we felt like this conversation was really important, but we wanted to also make sure that we had some space for art and music too. So kicking it over to Gillian.
Oh boy. Well, thanks everybody for a great conversation, really, and I think many more conversations we're going to have in the future. And thank you to everyone who are commenting in the chat. I'm going to try not to get distracted by that. So, and I see you, Christina, you know. Yeah, I'm not going to play Freebird. However, I thought I was going to do one of my songs, but then I don't know, it feels really weird to do one of my songs right now, given the conversation we just had. So I'm going to play a song that I very rarely play, not even mine. And it's a cover of a song, but I feel like it really speaks to the moment, and I just decided to do it, so I might screw it up. And I know that you're all friendly, so let's see how this goes. It's a cover of a Dave Matthews song. So can you all hear that? Don't give up, I know you can see all the world and the mess that we're making. Can give up and hope God will intercede. So come on back, imagine that we could get it together. Stand up for what we need to be. 'Cause crime won't save or feed a hungry child. Can lay down and wait for a miracle to change things. So lift up your eyes, lift up your heart, singing, mercy will we overcome this. Oh, one by one could we turn it around. Maybe carry on just a little bit longer, and I'll try to give you what you need. Me and you and you and you, we just want to be free, yeah, yeah. But you see, all the world is just as we've made it. And until we got a new world, I got to say that love is not a whisper or a weakness. No, love is strong. We got to get it together, yeah. Gotta get it, we gotta get it. Till there is no reason to fight. Mercy, will we overcome this? Hey, one by one, could we turn it around? Maybe carry on just a little bit longer, and I'll try to give you what you need. Hey, gotta get it, gotta get it, gotta get it, we gotta get it. Ooh, ooh. Mercy, will we overcome this? Have we gone too far to turn it around? Maybe ask too much to be a little bit stronger, and I want to give you what you need. Mercy, what will become of us? Oh, one by one we're gonna turn it around. Maybe carry on just a little bit longer, and I'll try to give you what you need. There you go. I think I only have time for one, so thanks everybody.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Gillian. We tried to organize a whole open mic so that we could hear Gillian sing at our last convention, and then it didn't happen. So thank you for sharing that with us, Gillian. You know, I think that's a really good reminder for all of us to fight hard, especially for our Black community members and for Black liberation. But we're no good to anyone if we're not taking care of ourselves too, right? And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to invite folks to actually put in the chat one commitment that you are going to be making in this fight for Black liberation, and we are going to put some some resources up on the screen, I believe. And some of the comments that folks have already put in. I know folks have asked for some resources. Yes, there are places that you can get more information. I think I already saw in the chat too that some folks were adding in more resources. I'm really looking forward to reading all of your commitments and going through all of your resources. And I'm seeing that Gillian wants to jump back in. Gillian, did you want to say something?
Just very quickly, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt the resources, but I will say this. If any of you decide that you want to buy the album tonight or whatever, put APALA in the note, and I will donate 40 to 50% of the money to Fair Fight Action. So if you want to support art, we want to support the movement too. So.
Awesome. That was a great interruption. So again, thank you everyone for joining. I want to give a really I want to give a really big thank you to Tefere, Zarlasht, and Kimberly for joining us today and sharing with us and giving us our call to action. For board members, I look forward to our board meeting tomorrow. And for the rest of our APALA family, I look forward to hearing from you about what you're doing in your unions and in your chapters in this fight that we all have to be in. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Loving all these commitments.
Should I read some of them since people are still on? Commitment to educate my family about Black lives. Thank you,
Did
Ruth.
I miss Julian?
Yes, Johanna, you missed Jillian.
Sorry. God damn it.
We recorded it, so you could watch it later.
All good. I see Dennis is committing to donating to Minnesota Freedom Fund. Kimberly is committed to actively mentoring and train leaders of color to run for office and take over. These are great commitments, y'all.
Naked baby!
Oh, recorded.
Oh, that's right.
I think with that, thank you, Maisie, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye. You can bye now.